Hey guys, welcome back to the Lux Business channel. I'm Tatiana. Today I'm going to share with you the answer to the question, should I source my products overseas or should I source them locally? Let's just jump right into it. So number one, I would like to mention that I would definitely recommend keeping this criteria in front of you at all times. Quality, profit margins, lead time. These are the three things that are of most value to me when I'm sourcing a product. I want to make sure the product is top quality because in the end, that's what's going to matter when you're building a brand. You're not going to get repeat buyers. You're not going to get word of mouth marketing if your brand sucks, if your product sucks. So you need to have good quality. And I think it's also just morally, it just sits better with you consciously, knowing that your product is of utmost great quality and your customer is going to really enjoy using it. Second is cost. So I actually put cost, profit margins second to quality because I actually do believe that I would pay a little bit more for a product if I knew it was better quality. And I can stand firm by this because I've experienced it. Going with a cheaper product, having poor quality compared to my competitors, you're not going to beat them. You need to have the best quality, but you also don't want to have such high costs that you're not making a profit. So you need to kind of use your own common sense with that. Third is lead time. So you want to find a supplier that can produce the goods relatively quickly because it's really important to have a short lead time so that if you do all of a sudden urgently need inventory, they can provide that for you. Second, I'd like to mention that anything that can be absorbed into the bloodstream or ingested orally, source that locally. So if you live in the US, source that in the US. If you live in France, source that in France. So just make sure you source those things locally just because there's more liability risk with those types of products, and your own country is going to have their own set of rules with what type of products and chemicals are allowed. So it's just safer to source it locally, and you never want to put yourself at risk and put the potential customer at risk of a product that could harm them. So anything that can get absorbed into blood, including lotions can get absorbed into the bloodstream, face creams, lipstick, mascara, anything like that, source it locally. I wouldn't source that overseas. But it's up to you, but that's just my 2 cents. So why do people source overseas instead of locally? Well, first of all, you know, every country has their own free trade agreements. In the US, I'm going to speak for the US because that's where most of you guys live that follow me. The US has, you know, different trade agreements with different countries. So it allows for easier import and export, and of course more affordable as well since they're trade agreements for duties and tariffs. So, for example, the Canada, US, and Mexico have NAFTA, which is a free trade agreement. So it becomes easier to import, export products from these countries. China and the US don't necessarily have a free trade agreement. So why is everybody importing from China? The reason for that is just because it's much lower cost to start a business in China than it is in the States. And that is because there are much fewer regulations. There's no minimum wage, there's no unions, there's no medical tax. They just, you know, have really low labor costs. So the fact of the matter is we would all love to source our products locally. Every business would love to hire people locally and source their stuff locally. The thing is, I can't afford that. As a business owner, I can speak for myself. I can't afford to open a business here in Canada, hire Canadians who the minimum wage is now around $15 an hour, and source my products here. It's just, it wouldn't be affordable. And the only way I could do that is if I increase the cost, the sale price of my products. And I know that if I increased the sale price dramatically, I wouldn't be getting as many sales because unfortunately, we live in this world where we want the cheapest. You know, we always want something that is cheaper than the next, and this is proven study after study. Personally, for you, that might not be the case, but for the majority of people, we always look for the best deal. And we don't necessarily look at the tag and look at the label and see where it's manufactured. And you can't blame people for that because the cost of living is very high here. The cost of living in China is much cheaper. In North America, we do pay a lot, and so when you're in a state of desperation, when you don't have a lot of money at your fingertips, you're not gonna look for the top quality, you're not gonna look for something that's sustainably made, you're not gonna look for something that's fair trade, all of these important factors, because at that point, you're just trying to put food on the table and trying to buy the bare minimum. So it is kind of a cycle, and as business owner, we want to you know, we want to create jobs in our own country, but it becomes harder because the consumer wants to pay less, and we know that we can give them what they want by sourcing overseas. So now what's happening is that there's a trade deficit between the US and China, where the US is importing way more than they're exporting to China, and it's causing a lot of debt. And the US, obviously, a lot of jobs are lost to people in China. And what's happening is most of those imports is actually US companies, you know, they have to shut down their manufacturing warehouses because they can no longer afford them. So they send the raw parts to be assembled in China. So they ship the parts to China. The Chinese people will assemble them, and then they ship them back to the US. So that's now considered an import to the United States. So unfortunately, that's where things are going. That's what's happening, just because their labor is far cheaper than what it is in the US. And, you know, we can't blame the businesses. We can't blame the consumers. It's just the way kind of the economy is working right now. And it's not really working. But I don't want to get into politics with this. I want to get strategic. So an option for you, if you can't afford to produce your products locally, then you can, you know, produce them overseas, manufacture them overseas. And as your business grows, as your profit margins increase, you can then start to manufacture locally, because then there will be a little bit more cash flow in the business. And when you have more cash flow, you can start to hire people locally. So I think that's a good option, because you can then start a business and grow it, and then once you have that cash flow, you can start to create jobs locally in your own country. But other than that, I mean, it's totally up to you where you source your products. I will say that it's definitely a lot more challenging to source overseas than locally, just with language barriers and the time zone. I would say the time zone is quite a challenge, because sometimes, you know, you want to end your workday at 8 p.m. and then they're starting their day at 8 p.m. your time. So, you know, you're on the Skype trying to communicate with them, and then you got to go to bed soon, and it's just not that great, but you got to deal with it. So that's the thing with China. But there's other places that you can source as well. And also, you can see this as a positive thing. So some people will source overseas, and they will create jobs for people that need it most. So people who are in poverty, and they create jobs for them. So for example, fair trade and ethically made clothing brands, they might source these things overseas, but they make sure that the conditions are great, and they actually give back a lot of them. So sometimes they, you know, create bracelets in Africa, and so they're creating jobs for women. I've seen a few lines like this where they're getting older women who would usually have a really hard time finding work. They would get them to create bracelets and employ them so that they have money for themselves that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So you can always think of it in a positive way and find places that really need employment, and also in China too, you know. So this applies everywhere. It applies locally, it applies overseas. Just do what is within your capacity. I don't know what it is right now. I don't know what your cash flow is, but just think of those things. I hope that this video helps you. If you guys have any more questions regarding this topic, feel free to comment down below, or any video requests. I'd love to hear your video requests for my next LuxBiz video. Comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.